Before we get started with this video, I'm going to demonstrate a really interesting material in real time. I have 5 grams, if you can see how little that is. It's a little less than a teaspoon of this unusual compound. And I'm going to place it in a bowl, and I'm going to add to it 500 grams or 500 milliliters of pure water. I'll give it a little bit of a stir, and we'll just let that go as we do the video. Now, in our last video, I demonstrated the incredible intensity of a fiber laser with power levels between 50 and about 500 megawatts per square centimeter continuously. A fiber laser can melt or burn through any known material. It isn't a matter of whether or not it can melt through it. It's just how long does it take. Now, the reason we have been investigating this is because we are building a directed energy device. And we're planning to try to take drones out of the air in mid-flight. And the fiber lasers should enable us to do that, but because of the intensity involved, we have to operate indoors. And that's where the problem began, because they are so powerful that when we use these lasers against the drones, if we miss a drone, or if we punch right through it, or we have a problem with the computer, or we have a problem with the hardware, and something glitches up so that the beam is not moving very rapidly. If it dwells or persists in one spot for more than about a second, we're going to burn right through the side of the building. We can't have that. So in the last video, we demonstrated some different material interactions with the laser. And for safety, we had a backstop built from some heavy concrete blocks, which effectively did block the laser beam. The problem is we have to protect an area or a surface area of about 20 square meters. It's a little bit larger than the back wall of this entire room. So if we were to build a protective barrier to catch or intercept that beam, it would weigh over 12 tons. This simply is not practical. So during that video, when we were demonstrating different materials, we investigated the interaction of the beam with steel, burnt a hole right through it, glass, ruptured the glass. We started some wood on fire. We burnt right through a aluminum oxide fire brick. But the winner of the contest was actually the lowly cucumber. And following it, not far behind, was a banana. And the reason these things operated so well is because of the high water content inside of the vegetable and the fruit. And the reason water is such a good candidate for this process is because, number one, it's free. Number two, it has a very high heat capacity. It takes a lot of heat to warm it up and then even more energy to vaporize it into steam. So it can absorb a lot of the laser energy. Now, the panels or the material that we need to build our backstop with has to have several properties. Number one, it has to be cheap. It also has to be easily available, something that we can obtain locally. It should not give off toxic fumes or vapors when we're firing a laser at it. It shouldn't burst into flame. And hopefully it's light enough that we can move these panels out of the way when we're between tests or we're doing other videos. So based on the response of the cucumber to the laser, I decided to look into the idea of water as our barrier. Now, some people, when they had commented on the video, they said, well, what about a waterfall if you just flowed water behind the beam? The problem is you need a fair thickness. It's not going to work to have 0.5 millimeter of water. And so if you're covering a large wall like this that's pretty vertical and you need several centimeters of water, you'd need enormous pumping capacity. So you want to contain the water. So what I did is I constructed some test boxes in order to be able to see how well this works. And for the materials, I used hardboard, which is basically what you make pegboard out of. It's cheap and it's widely available. And then I glued to it some wooden boards to form a container with a small hole at the top that allows me to fill this. Now, if I were to seal this closed and fill it with water, this probably would be a pretty effective barrier to the laser. The problem is, as soon as you punch through the surface, and you will do so in milliseconds, the water will begin spraying out into the room. And depending on how far down you are on the panel, the hydrostatic pressure can be pretty significant. And therefore, we're going to be spraying water all over the place and making a hazard during the test. Let me just take a look at something. Yeah, it's getting there. You'll see what I'm talking about in a little bit. So what we decided to do is to look into a different method for containing the water. Use some way to hold it in place like it is in the cucumber, but at the same time, it still has to be non-toxic and relatively cheap. And this is the substance that I'm going to be demonstrating. Now, in order to do a more complete test, I built up 4 of these panels in order to test different properties and modifications of this water-containing material. The first 2 have been divided so that I can actually test 2 different types of materials in each one. The first side over here is going to be just empty. So it'll be hardboard, air, and hardboard. It's a control. The second side is going to have an unmodified version of this stuff. You have to mess around with this. It's really cool. Anyway, these 2 panels are also going to use this thickened water, but we're going to modify it using a principle that was first described by Gustav Mie. He was a German physicist, and it has to do with the scattering of light. You see, when you have particles that are smaller than the wavelength of electromagnetic radiation, in this case, 1 micron laser light, those particles don't reflect so much like mirrors. They spread out the light. They cause it to diffract and spread into a much larger area. It's the same principle that causes clouds and fog to be obscuring. See, for example, this beaker of water, even though it's distorted by the shape of the beaker, you can see easily through it. But if you put this in a fog machine or you created a cloud, you wouldn't be able to get through it. And a laser beam would have the same problem that the sunlight does getting to your eyes. It will diffuse it into a much larger area. So in 2 of these containers over here, I'm going to add a scattering material. In one, silicon dioxide. In the other, titanium dioxide. Now, silicon dioxide has a particle size of about 150 nanometers, which is just about ideal for this purpose. The titanium dioxide has a particle size of about 250 nanometers. It's a little bigger, but it also has the benefit of a much higher melting temperature, so it may in fact work a little bit better. We're going to put the silicon dioxide in this side, we're going to put the titanium dioxide in this side, and we're going to see if in fact we get a longer penetration time than we do in just the thickened material. Now, as you can see here, this is starting to get like a warm version of Jello or gelatin. And I'm not going to make you wait too long. This beaker contains exactly the same ratio that I've put in this bowl. We'll let it continue to get thicker. But you can see how it becomes almost like a solid at a 1% concentration. This polymer, sodium polyacrylate, is used for retaining water around the roots of plants. That's why you can see in this container here, that's what it's marketed for. It's very inexpensive. It's relatively non-toxic. It's used in baby diapers. And if you have kids, you've actually handled this stuff in the past. So these 2 containers are a little bit different, but the same sort of philosophy. We're going to fill it up with the silicon dioxide modified polymer. In both cases, we're going to be using exactly the same ratios and exactly the same amounts. But in the back surface of these containers, you can see this gray material. I've put down about 2 millimeters of a special concrete based on cement plus silicon carbide. Silicon carbide is an extremely hard material. It's used in grinding wheels and some sandpaper, and it has a very high refractive index. And so the concept here is that if the laser penetrates, let's say from the concrete side first, do we blast into the material that's present inside of the container a quantity of the silicon dioxide that helps to diffract and diffuse the light, in addition to the diffusing effect of the silicon dioxide? We can also reverse this. So we can send the beam in from the wood side first, or we can send it in from the concrete side first to see if there's any benefit to adding the additional concrete. It's a very thin layer, so it doesn't add much to the weight, but it may add significantly to the performance. The other box that I have here is identical to the first, except in this case, instead of sealing it with another piece of hardboard like I'm going to do here, I'm going to seal this one with an aluminum plate. Now, this can be reversed. We can send the beam in either way. This cannot be reversed. We have to send it in through the concrete side first because we don't want to hit the aluminum with the laser beam. It will reflect into the room. And then I made sort of an executive decision, and I decided if it turns out that the titanium dioxide thickened material works better, that's what we will use in the main panels. If it doesn't work better, we're going to use the silicon dioxide as opposed to the titanium dioxide. So we're going to use the same silicon dioxide in both of these to see if the aluminum has an effect, and then we're going to compare the silicon and titanium dioxide in these two panels. So you can see I'm creating kind of a matrix. Everything examines a certain feature of a certain material. Now, if I show you this bowl, we're getting along here. You can see that this is getting closer and closer to the final mixture. Again, same concentrations, but this stuff is absolutely remarkable. It makes you want to give it a taste, you know. But in any case, then what I'm going to do is we'll take off the tape, we'll put on some caulk, we'll seal these things up, and then we'll go over to the workshop or the warehouse and we're going to test these under the laser. So I'm going to get to work here. Let's start out with this over here and begin filling the container with some of this material. And this stuff is stable. I've had an open container like this in this room for 5 or 6 days, and it really doesn't change very much. The evaporation of water is slowed by the presence of the polymer. And then I'm going to add the rest of this here after this has sealed up a little bit. The point is, we don't actually have to completely fill these. That's what the advantage of the hole is here. Once I've gotten a pretty full mixture, if I add additional water, it won't sit on top. It will be absorbed into the gel. So it will just fill this up and eliminate any kind of air gaps. Now we're going to go with the silicon dioxide modified version of this polymer mixture over here. Isn't laser science fun? And the reason for the tape is I just wanted to keep the edges dry so that when I put the caulk down, I'm going to get a reasonably good seal. Also, you'll notice, if I didn't mention this already, the sort of reflective nature of these insides of these boxes is simply a thin layer of brushed on epoxy so we don't absorb into the wood and either hurt the adhesive that's holding everything together or lose some of the water from the area that we want to work in. And because big panels would end up having just sort of a wall around the edge, we probably have to overlap them slightly so that we don't actually have any gaps between them. And oops, I've got a little bit in the wrong one, but we won't worry too much about that. I can probably grab that out. That's good enough. I don't have to do a better job than that. Let's see if I can get this out of here. It's pretty goopy. Now the titanium dioxide is the same thing that makes white paint white. So you'll notice it looks a lot whiter and less translucent than the fumed silica. It does look like cottage cheese, but I wouldn't eat this. And if you have any opportunity or you are into planting or some reason why you might want to get some of this, it is not expensive and it is just fun as a sort of school project, something to impress your friends and family with, because it just seems so improbable that such a small quantity of this stuff thickens up so effectively. I think that's going to be good. Underfilling isn't a problem because we can just add the additional water, but overfilling would be a problem because I might not be able to get the tops down. Now these over here, this should be relatively easy to do. And I think I would end up probably using a mix master. Oh, I moved it away from here. I did these by hand, but if you were making these in very large quantities, you'd probably want to get either the drill press mixer like we use for doing the geothermal air conditioner, or get a industrial sort of mix master, because you'll break your hand if you're trying to do 800 pounds of this, or 400 kilograms of it. That's getting pretty close, actually. I don't have to go too much. And because this could probably absorb 10 times as much water, filling it up after the fact really isn't a problem. But I don't want to be too lean because I'm not going to be adding any more of the silicon dioxide if I just add water. So I don't want to cheat and produce an uneven thickness of what would be the scattering medium. So I want to try to be reasonably full without getting too crazy. Probably go a little more. Okay. Now this guy. So this is going to be interesting to see how effective this is. And time-wise, this should be pretty fast, because if you were doing large panels with large buckets, you could just dump these in, let it sort of flow laterally and then seal them up. So it'd probably take you twice as long to do 8 times the surface area. And what's also nice, at least with this material, or even this, if we want to dispose of it, ultimately, we could just leave it out and let the material evaporate. And what you'd end up with is probably, even in our big project, a couple of kilograms of this material. That bucket there could thicken 5,000 gallons or 20,000 liters of water. So you don't have much left behind that you'd actually have to dispose of. Almost all of this will disappear when you're done with your project and you don't need your absorbent panels, which is kind of a neat thing, as opposed to something that's going to be expensive or difficult or problematic to dispose of. All right. All right, I think I did a decent job with this, and let's take a look at that gel that I started with at the beginning of the video. What's it been, 10 minutes? You see? I'm not kidding. This stuff really is amazing. So let's go ahead and add this to the first container here. I have pretty high hopes for this. I think this is going to work. I think we may have our ultimate solution. And then we got to get on to the robotics and the actual control system, and less on sort of these safety features. Okay. I think pretty good. So I'm going to take some of this out of here just so we have a little more room and you can see better. And now we're going to get the blue tape off of here. a little bit of silicone caulk. This is better than using epoxy because it's going to be more compliant. So if I didn't sand this or finish this properly, it will be forgiving in terms of the seal. Just as a piece of information, the reason this is tapered like this is so this single hole will allow me to add water to either side. That's not necessary because I skewed this over here. So the hole is open to the side that would potentially get some water in it. All right, let's put this down so it doesn't drip too much. And now panels. This side I didn't coat, there's no reason to coat it. This is the side to keep water from infiltrating the wood. So just get this reasonably close to centered. All right, so we're going to give that a little bit of time to cure. Then we're going to get this over to the warehouse. We're going to set up the laser, we're going to fire, and we're going to try to destroy them. We'll see you in a little bit. Okay, we've moved everything over to the warehouse, and we're going to be testing the different panels that we just finished assembling a few hours ago. Now, if you have any questions about the fiber lasers, the optics, the principles of the way they work, take a look at our last video because I go into some detail about that. So if you're interested about that, I think you'll find your answers there. Now, one interesting thing I just want to cover before we begin the first test is that you may notice if you look very carefully at the red spot that's telling us where the beam is going to hit when we energize the laser. The spot does not look very, very small. The actual firing diameter or focus diameter of the infrared beam is a little under 100 microns in diameter. So the intensity of the light on the spot there is currently at about 20 million watts per square centimeter. So it's very high. And as a matter of fact, that level of energy is enough to melt through anything. We're just going to see how long it takes to go through our different panels and what kind of protection we get. Now, the reason the spot diameter, the red diameter, is larger is a phenomenon called chromatic aberration. Effectively, when you have a lens made out of a certain material, it will focus different wavelengths of light at a different distance. This is common in all lenses. But for well over 100 years, to correct that in cameras, microscopes, telescopes, they will often use lenses made from different types of materials that compensate for that differential focal length, so they can get what's called an achromatic lens. With extremely high-powered laser optics, you want to minimize the number of lens elements and the potential for absorbing a lot of heat in the optical system. So we're using singlet lenses, and as a result, the red, which is much shorter wavelength than the infrared that the laser is going to be putting out, it actually has a focal distance that's substantially farther from the point of impact here. And so right now, it's about a 1 millimeter diameter beam. In order to determine what that infrared beam diameter is, we actually use what's called a burn paper. It looks like an old mimeograph or copy paper, which is a tissue paper coated with a little bit of a carbon or some sort of ink, so that when you hit it with a beam, you actually create a burn pattern. You can see asymmetry in the beam, you can measure the diameter, and that's how you can nail down the actual focal diameter of the beam that you can't see and that you don't want to be standing very near when you're firing it. So rather than using very sophisticated methods to determine angles, we're just simply burning holes in things and adjusting the distance to optimize where we're going to be hitting this. All right, now to the test. The first sample that we made was a control. It's simply hardboard, air, and hardboard. This is going to be our starting point to show what happens when we have nothing but air between the two layers. So Alex, you have your goggles on? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to fire this at 3, 2, 1, Okay, you can see that it went through, my guess would be about a second, maybe a little less, 3/4 of a second. When we post this video, we're actually going to put the actual measured time based on frames below so that you'll see the specific amount of time it took to burn through there, but less than a second. Now, I'm going to move this over a little bit, and we're going to hit this once more just to get consistency here. So goggles on. Yep. 3, 2, 1. So about the same. Now the other side, if you remember, is filled with this gel. And this is the sodium polyacrylate that we had mixed up in order to contain a lot of water. And we're going to see if the effect of placing a large water layer between the two surfaces is going to provide us a longer duration before penetration. Goggles? Yeah. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Still not through. It's still not through. I never thought we'd have to do a time lapse on one of these. I think we're done.
Can you just get a sledgehammer or something?
Yeah, right. I think I should hit it with something. That's 20 million watts per square centimeter.
I wonder if the material above it is slowly moving down, giving it fresh material.
I think it is. I think we're at the point where it's kind of like this could go for an hour. Well, at this point, I think I'm going to stop it. And just to confirm, in case you can't see the back, it's unscathed. It's not even warm. You can see, though, what's kind of interesting, is all of that heat that's been absorbed is starting to extrude some of that gelatinous material, and it's still coming because of all the heat that's been placed in there. But this is a heck of a lot better than spraying water like we did with the Red Bull halfway across the room and making everybody slip. Kind of disgusting. Well, to be fair, we did make the other samples. Let's see what happens. Okay, I've just replaced that panel with the second panel that we fabricated, which has two halves. Same sodium polyacrylate, but mixed in with some nanopowder silicon dioxide. The other side is the one that had the titanium dioxide nanopowder mixed into it. I'm not even sure it's worth the effort to do that based on what we saw, but let's see what happens. Let's see if we get some interesting results. Okay, you got your goggles on?
Yep.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. It seems a little brighter. I wonder if that's some of the silica reflecting and diffracting the light, at least initially. It does seem to be behaving differently. This is really cool. But it's not burning through. Now, seeing as we've got enough duration, I'm going to turn this off because I know I could run this a lot longer. I'll just show you the back, but the reason I'm going to turn it off is you can see the smoke that's rising. And one concern I have is if we do a lot of these tests, we're going to set off some alarms. So I'm going to play it a little bit safe, seeing as I know I've got a barrier that's going to work. But again, if you look, there's nothing. Let's see if the sort of reflection, diffraction light that comes off from the other side is any different. Now, this is the titanium dioxide version. Okay, goggles?
Yep.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Putting a lot more sparks.
A lot more sparks. I think because the titanium dioxide has such a high melting and vaporization temperature, it's not actually turning into vapor, it's actually turning into molten liquid titanium dioxide, and that's why we're sending the sparks out. Oh, it burned through. Interesting. I actually thought this was going to be the better material, and it works worse than adding nothing. So I'm not sure we're going to be adding any additives to the sodium polyacrylate, but we're definitely not going to add the titanium dioxide. Let me show you. You can see we got a burn through. So that is a bad choice. All right, time to move on. Okay, now if you remember, number 3 is using the silicon dioxide micropowder or fumed silica added to the sodium polyacrylate. The difference is the back surface here has a couple of millimeters of that special concrete. So we're firing from the wood side through to the concrete side in this example. We'll see if it has any effect. Okay, glasses? Okay, or I should say goggles. 3, 2, 1. It's really hard to even look at this with the goggles on because they protect us from the laser light. But, you know, an arc welder is also too bright for normal eyes. And so that just the illumination, the brightness level, not the laser light, but the brightness from the heat is super. Ooh. This is kind of interesting. The plain silicon dioxide seems to produce, like you said, less sparks. Famous last words. Oh, burn through. That's interesting. So it appears that the concrete definitely doesn't help and just adds steps and weight. But you can see that is also a burn through. So I'll repeat it one more time, just a little over here. And Alex, I'm just going to ask you for future reference, can you sort of see when it comes through to the other side?
I can't see. I'm doing it by hearing, because those concrete blocks, or whatever they're made out of, make that sort of like hissing static sound.
So you can use that for a shut-off time if you're going to try to calibrate based on frames. Okay. Goggles on?
Yep.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Damn, that's bright. Now, it's a great way to spend a day. Now you can see the second hole over here. Now what I'm going to do that I can't do in the last panel is we're going to try this from the other side. In other words, concrete side first, see if that has any positive benefit. Although I don't think we're going to use the concrete as long as we've got the what seems to be a superior, simpler solution. Let's test it. Goggles?
Yeah.
All right. 3, 2, 1. That hit the concrete first. Much more debris. And I'm not impressed with the concrete. There. All right, so I don't know. Definitely the concrete doesn't seem to be adding anything other than maybe a little bit more pyrotechnics. So we could save weight, we could save money, make it simpler. Let's do the last panel. All right, what I've just set up here is the final panel, and the only difference between this and the one we just tested is the fact that we have aluminum on the back surface. We're definitely not going to run the aluminum on the front surface. Not while there are people in the room or anything that could be destroyed by reflected beams. The only reason for testing this is because it is so similar to the last panel. If we compare the timing of the penetration through that panel to the timing on the penetration with this panel, we may decide whether or not we want to use aluminum with our simplest gel material as an option when we're building the large panels. So we're going to see if there's a differential between aluminum or hardboard on the back surface. Goggles on?
Yep.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, 0. Seems to have gotten kind of quiet. I'm liking this. If you look carefully at the top, you can actually see the light coming out of the fill hole. I think it's illuminating the inside by reflecting off the aluminum. Okay, I think we've learned something also important here. The aluminum is definitely helping. Wow. It's glowing on the other side. It's glowing a dull red. It doesn't look like it's at melting temperature. And I think I have a mechanism here and a good reason to use aluminum. Ah, but I can see the aluminum is beginning to peel away from the box. It must be getting so hot that it's starting to either melt the silicone sealant or it's beginning to warp the panel. I'm gonna need some coffee. Okay, I think this is a decision. I'm gonna turn this off and quickly turn this around and you'll be able to see the glowing spot. Oh, yep, the whole panel is hot. You can see where it's made a little divot here, but it hasn't cut through it. And you'll also notice the size of the divot and the heat affected zone around the divot. What I think is probably happening is that the particles, the silicon dioxide, is causing the beam to enlarge. So instead of 100 microns, it may be several millimeters or even a centimeter in diameter, allowing the aluminum to absorb more of the heat. So the aluminum's heat resistance isn't overwhelmed by the intensity of the beam. So I think our solution is pretty obvious. The front board, the hard board we're going to use on the front, cheap, easy to work with, simple. I think we're probably not going to use any of the nano powders because I'm not sure they're really adding that much in terms of performance. We'll probably just stick with the sodium polyacrylate. But then the backside, I think, should be aluminum. I think that is a perfect solution. It's lightweight, it's easy, it's relatively simple to put together, and obviously it lasts so long that we're getting tired of waiting for it. All we need is about 3 or 4 seconds to either have the beam move or have the beam turned off by the computer or an emergency stop. The other thing you should notice that I think is pretty important here, is this still hot? Yeah, it's still a little warm, is that there's basically no water coming out here. So by using this gel, once we've made a hole here, we can do this again and again and again in a panel without losing our barrier because it's trapped inside of there by the gel form. So we got our solution. So once we outfit this whole facility with some safety walls, we've got our lasers, we have our protection, we have our kill zone. We're going to need to get back in touch with miters and maybe talk to some of the robotics people there about looking at doing the upgrades that we want to do to the LiDAR, the tracking system, just get this thing actually running so we can do some tests because we've got about 30 drones that need to be taken care of. So if you like what we're covering here, you like the kind of content, please take a second or two to subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent and it really helps out the channel. The bigger we get, the more of this kind of stuff we can do. In addition, if you put a comment in the below the video, I read them all and I will address as many questions as I can and I'll give you feedback. And also, because we've begun a new policy of following our releases that evening with a live stream. I will wish you good day, stay safe, have fun, and we'll see you tonight.